The world was watching. It was supposed to be the day of infinite peace. Every major city had giant screens set up in the streets. Millions of people held candles, and billions more were glued to their phones and televisions. The ceremony was taking place in the neutral zone of the Ivory City, a place built of glass and hope. The High Mediator, an old man with hair like silver and a voice like a calm river, stood at the podium. He wasn't just a politician. He was the symbol of the end of all wars. Beside him stood the leaders of the 5 great nations, their hands joined. Today, the mediator whispered into the microphone, we bury the sword forever. I was sitting in a dusty cafe on the outskirts of District 9, watching the broadcast on a flickering screen. My team was with me, Jax, our heavy gunner, Alina, the best hacker in the underground, and Kale, a man who could disappear in broad daylight. We weren't there for peace. We were there because we didn't trust the silence. Look at them, Jax grumbled, cleaning his fingernails with a combat knife. They think a few speeches can erase centuries of blood. Let them hope, Jax, Alina said softly, her eyes fixed on the screen. Maybe for once the world can just breathe. Then it happened. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a single red dot that appeared on the High Mediator's forehead. It stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. The camera zoomed in, capturing the confusion in his eyes, and then his head snapped back. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the speakers of every device on Earth. The screen didn't go black. The attackers wanted the world to see. Men in obsidian black armor dropped from the ceiling of the Ivory City. They didn't use normal weapons. They used pulse rifles that turned human bodies into ash. On live television, in high definition, the symbols of peace were hunted down like animals. The Ivory City, the city of glass, began to shatter. The screams of the crowd at the event were deafening, but the silence of the billions watching at home was even louder. They're doing it, Kale whispered, standing up. His face was pale. They're actually doing it. They're killing the idea of peace. On the screen, a man in a faceless black mask walked up to the main camera. He stepped over the fallen podium. He didn't say a word. He simply raised a hand, and behind him, the Ivory City erupted in a massive, blinding explosion. The feed cut to static. The cafe was silent. Outside, in the streets of District 9, the cheers had turned into cries of terror. People were running, realizing that the protection of the law had vanished in a single broadcast. I stood up and put on my heavy leather coat. I felt a cold, familiar weight settling in my chest. For years, I had tried to forget the smell of gunpowder. I had tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could live a normal life. But the world didn't want peace. It wanted a monster. Chief, Jax asked. He was standing now, his hand resting on the grip of his massive rifle. What's the play? I looked at my team. We were the ghosts of the old wars, the ones they tried to hide when the peace talks started. We were the Unbreakables, a unit that didn't exist on any map. They wanted to show the world that peace is a lie, I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. They wanted to show that they are the new masters of fear. They brought the end of the world to everyone's living room. I walked over to the corner of the cafe and ripped away a false wall, revealing a locker filled with weapons that hadn't seen the light in 5 years. I grabbed my signature twin handguns, heavy, black steel with justice and mercy engraved on the barrels. They killed peace on a live broadcast, I said, checking the magazine of the first gun. The click echoed through the room. They think they've won because no one is left to fight back. I looked at the static on the TV screen. They're wrong, they wanted a show. We're going to give them a war. And this time we aren't stopping until there is nothing left standing. No more treaties, no more talks, just fire. Alina's fingers flew across her portable deck. I've traced the signal, Chief. It didn't come from a rebel group. It came from within the Ivory City's own security network. It was an inside job by the Iron Hand, a private military group funded by the elite. Then the elite are the first to go, I said. We walked out of the cafe and into the chaos of the street. Smoke was already rising from the city center. The sky, which had been clear and blue for the ceremony, was turning a dark, bruised purple as the fires grew. The world was mourning, but we were past mourning. We were moving. We reached our hidden hangar under the bridge. The Vulture, our high-speed assault ship, was waiting. It was an ugly, brutal piece of machinery, but it was fast and it carried enough firepower to level a fortress. As the engines roared to life, I looked at the horizon. The Ivory City was burning, a pillar of smoke reaching for the clouds. Jax, prep the heavy ordnance, I commanded. Kale, I want eyes on every Iron Hand commander. Elena, override their satellites. I want them to know we're coming, but I want them to be unable to do anything about it. And you, Chief? Elena asked. I strapped my helmet on, the red visor glowing in the dark hangar. I'm going to go find the man in the mask, I said, and I'm going to make him wish he had died in that explosion. The Vulture lifted off the ground, its thrusters screaming. We tore through the air, heading straight for the heart of the chaos. The era of peace was over. The era of war had begun, and we were the ones who were going to finish it. The Vulture sliced through the clouds like a jagged blade. Inside the ship, the red emergency lights bathed everything in a bloody glow. We weren't flying toward a rescue mission. We were flying into the mouth of hell. Target in sight, Elena called out from the cockpit. Her hands moved across the holographic screens with lightning speed. The Iron Hand's primary logistics hub, the Anvil. It's a reinforced skyscraper in the middle of the business district. They've turned the whole sector into a fortress. I stood behind her, looking at the thermal scan. The building was glowing bright white. Thousands of soldiers, automated turrets, and armored vehicles surrounded the base. They thought they were safe because they had the numbers. They didn't realize that numbers don't matter when you've already decided you have nothing to lose. They're broadcasting again, Jax shouted from the weapons station. He pointed to a small monitor. The man in the black mask was back on the screen. He was sitting in a plush leather chair, a glass of expensive wine in his hand, while the city burned in the background of his window. People of the world, the masked man said, his voice smooth and cold. Do not be afraid. The old world was weak. We have simply removed the rot. Accept the Iron Hand and you shall have order. Resist and you shall follow the mediator into the ash. I reached over and smashed the monitor with my fist. The screen shattered, sparking with electricity. Jax, I said, my voice low, how much fire do we have? Jax grinned, showing his teeth. Chief, I packed enough thermite and high-explosive shells to turn that skyscraper into a pile of toothpicks. Just give the word. Drop us on the roof, I ordered Elena. Jax, you and Kale take the top-down approach. I want the communication arrays destroyed first. I want them blind. I want them screaming for help that isn't coming. Copy that, Elena said, pulling the lever. Brace yourselves, we're going hot. The Vulture dived. The ground-to-wear missiles from the Anvil began to streak toward us, leaving trails of white smoke in the dark sky. Elena spiraled the ship, flares popping off the back like fireworks to distract the heat-seekers. Deploying now, Kale yelled. The bottom hatch of the Vulture hissed open. The wind roared into the cabin, a cold gale that smelled of salt and smoke. Kale and Jax didn't hesitate. They hooked their lines and plummeted into the darkness, disappearing toward the roof of the skyscraper. I waited. My heart was a steady drum in my chest, 100 beats per minute, calm, precise. 3, 2, 1, impact, Elena whispered. A massive explosion rocked the top of the building. The communication tower snapped and tumbled over the side, falling 60 stories to the ground. The broadcast for the entire city went black. The order was interrupted. My turn, I said. I didn't use a rope. I activated my gravity boots and stepped out into the empty air. The fall was a blur of lights and wind. I crashed through the glass windows of the 50th floor, the executive level. I landed in a roll, glass shards flying everywhere, before the guards could even raise their rifles. I pulled justice and mercy. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, 3 bodies hit the floor. The suppressed sound of my handguns was like the heartbeat of a ghost. I stood up, the long tails of my coat settling around my boots. "Intruder, level 50, we need," a guard shouted into his radio. I stepped forward and fired a round through his throat before he could finish. "Nobody is coming to save you," I said to the empty hallway. The alarms were screaming now. Red lights flashed against the marble walls. I moved like a shadow, checking every corner. My HUD heads-up display inside my helmet showed Jax and Kale moving through the vents above me. "Chief, we've placed the charges on the main support beams," Jax's voice crackled in my ear. "But we've got a problem. They've got civilians in the sub-lobby. They're using them as shields." I stopped at the elevator bank. My jaw tightened. How many? At least 100 families, people who were trying to find shelter. This was the Iron Hands tactic. They knew we were heroes once. They thought we still played by the rules of the old world. They thought our morality was a weakness they could exploit. "Elena," I said, "can you isolate the floor ventilation for the lobby?" "Yeah, why?" "Flood it with Sleep 6. Knock everyone out. The guards, the civilians, everyone. Once they're down, Jax, you move in and extract the civilians to the parking garage. Kale, you cover them." "And you, Chief, what about the commanders?" Kale asked. "I'm going to the penthouse," I replied. "The man in the mask is waiting for his wine to be finished. I'd hate to disappoint him." I stepped into the elevator and used my combat knife to short-circuit the panel. The car began to hum, racing upward toward the very top of the world. As the floors ticked by 80, 90, 100, I checked my weapons. I had 4 magazines left for each gun. My knife was sharp. My resolve was sharper. The elevator doors opened to a massive, circular room. The walls were made entirely of reinforced glass, giving a 360-degree view of the burning city. It was beautiful in a horrific way. The man in the mask was standing by the window. He didn't turn around. "You're late," he said. His voice was distorted by a modulator. "I expected the famous Unbreakables to be here 5 minutes ago. You're getting slow in your old age." "We took a detour to save the people you were planning to use as bait," I said, walking slowly into the room. My boots clicked on the polished floor. The man turned around. He wasn't wearing armor. He was wearing a tuxedo. The mask was white porcelain, shaped like a smiling face. "People," he laughed, a hollow metallic sound. "They are sheep. They need a shepherd. The mediator was a weak shepherd. I am a strong one." "You're a murderer with a loud microphone," I countered. "And your broadcast just ended." Suddenly, 4 hidden panels in the ceiling slid open. 4 combat droids, sleek and silver, dropped down, their arm cannons glowing blue. "Kill him," the masked man said, taking a sip of his wine. The droids opened fire. I dove behind a structural pillar as plasma bolts melted the stone where I had been standing. I didn't panic. I breathed. 1, 2, 3. I swung out from the pillar, firing justice at the sensor eye of the first droid. The bullet pierced the lens and the machine sparkled and collapsed. I didn't stop. I ran across the room, sliding under the fire of the second droid. I kicked its legs out and jammed my knife into its neck joint, twisting until the metal screamed. 2 left. "Jax now," I yelled into my comms. Boom! An explosion rocked the building from below. The entire skyscraper groaned. The masked man lost his balance, his wine spilling across his white shirt. The distraction was all I needed. I jumped onto the desk, launched myself into the air, and fired both guns simultaneously into the heads of the remaining droids. They fell like scrap metal. I landed in front of the masked man. He dropped his glass. He reached for a hidden pistol under his jacket, but I was faster. I grabbed his wrist and snapped it. He cried out, dropping to his knees. I grabbed the edge of his porcelain mask and ripped it off. My heart stopped for a split second. I knew this face. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a greedy businessman. It was General Vance, the man who had trained me, the man who had led the Unbreakables 10 years ago. "General," I whispered, the shock momentarily cooling my rage. Vance spat blood on my boots, his face twisted in a sneer. "You always were too sentimental. Look at the world, son. It was falling apart. I didn't kill peace. I just gave it a mercy killing. I'm building something that will last 1,000 years. By killing innocent people. By killing the weak," he hissed. "And you're the weakest of them all. You think you've won. This building is rigged to blow. If I don't enter my code every 10 minutes, the whole district goes up. You kill me, you kill everyone you just saved." I looked at him. I looked at the city below, where thousands were still fighting for their lives. Then I looked back at the man who taught me how to fight. "You forgot one thing, General," I said, pressing the barrel of justice against his forehead. "What's that?" he gasped. "I stopped being your student a long time ago, and I stopped believing in hostages the moment you killed the mediator." I didn't hesitate. Bang! I stood over his body as the building began to shake. The countdown had started. "Alina, get the vulture to the balcony. Now," I shouted into the radio. "The anvil is coming down." The skyscraper groaned like a dying beast. Deep in its foundations, the first of the demolition charges began to detonate. The floor beneath my boots tilted sharply, and the expensive furniture in General Vance's penthouse slid toward the shattered windows. "Chief, the whole structure is losing integrity." Alina's voice was frantic over the comms. "The vulture is 3 minutes out, but the rooftop is already crumbling. You need to get out of there now." I looked down at the body of my former mentor. He had died with a smile, knowing that his final act of destruction would take me with him. I didn't have time for a burial, and I didn't have time for regrets. I grabbed the encrypted data drive from the general's desk, the one containing the names of the elite who funded this massacre, and ran for the balcony. "Jax Cale, where are you?" I shouted into my helmet. "Lobby is clear," Jax's voice came through, punctuated by the sound of his heavy machine gun. "We got the civilians into the underground tunnels, but the Iron Hand reinforcements are surrounding the building. They aren't letting us leave." "Forget the front door," I ordered. "Get to the secondary extraction point at the mid-level helipad. Alina is coming for us." I reached the balcony just as the top 5 floors of the anvil began to shear off. The wind at this height was a hurricane, whipping my coat around me. Below, the city was a map of fire and chaos. The Iron Hand wasn't just a private army. They were a virus, and they were spreading. Suddenly, a shadow fell over me. It wasn't the vulture. An Iron Hand hunter drone, a sleek black killing machine equipped with dual rotary cannons, rose from the smoke, its red sensors locking onto my position. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered. The drone opened fire. I dove behind a reinforced concrete pillar as the marble railing was shredded into dust. I couldn't shoot it down with my handguns. The armor was too thick. I looked around and saw a high-tension cable running from the balcony to a neighboring building. I didn't think, I just moved. I leaped over the edge, grabbing the cable with my mag gloves. The friction sent sparks flying, and I zipped down the wire like a lightning bolt. Behind me, the hunter drone turned, its cannons tracking my movement. Rat-tat-tat-tat. Bullets hissed past my ears, snapping the cable just as I reached the halfway point. I went into a freefall, the ground rushing up to meet me from 40 stories high. "Alina, now!" I roared. The vulture roared out from behind a cloud of smoke, its side hatch open. I slammed onto the metal ramp, my fingers clawing for a grip. Jax reached out a massive hand and caught me by the collar of my coat, hauling me inside just as the hunter drone exploded in a ball of blue flame, hit by Alina's tail gunner. I lay on the floor of the ship, gasping for air. Jack slapped my shoulder. "Nice of you to join us, Chief. Did you bring the party favors?" I held up the data drive. The names of every man who paid for the mediator's death. They wanted a new world order. We're going to give them a bill they can't pay. "We've got a problem," Kale said, pointing to the ship's scanners. "The anvil's collapse didn't stop them. Look at the streets." I looked out the window. The Iron Hand wasn't retreating. With Vance dead, they had transitioned to Phase 2. Thousands of soldiers were pouring out of hidden bunkers across the city. They were setting up barricades and executing anyone on the street. They weren't just a military group anymore. They were an occupying force. "They're taking the bridges," Alina said, her voice shaking slightly. "They're trapping everyone in the city. They're going to burn District 9 to the ground to purify the population." "Not on my watch," I said, standing up and checking my ammo. "Alina, head for the radio tower at the edge of the district. If we can't stop the broadcast, we'll take over the signal. The world needs to know that Vance is dead and that his order is nothing but a slaughterhouse." "Chief, that tower is guarded by a battalion," Kale warned. "We're 4 people in a damaged ship." I looked at my team. We were bruised, bleeding, and exhausted. We were the ghosts of a forgotten war, but in our eyes the fire was still burning. "They killed peace on live TV," I said, my voice echoing in the small cabin. "Now we're going to show the world what happens when the war comes home. We aren't just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for every person they tried to turn into a sheep." "Load the incendiaries," I told Jax. "Kale, prep the jamming signals. Alina, fly like you've got a death wish." As the Vulture banked hard toward the giant radio tower on the horizon, I looked at the data drive in my hand. This wasn't just a list of names. It was a death warrant. The first part of the war was over. The general was dead. But the real monsters were still hiding in their ivory towers, watching the world burn from their screens. It was time to pull them out into the light. "Let's go to work," I said. The Vulture's engine screamed, and we dove into the heart of the enemy's formation, 4 shadows against a world of fire. The radio tower, known as the Needle, pierced the smoke-filled sky like a giant spear. It was the highest point in the city, the source of every broadcast, every news feed, and every lie the Iron Hand was feeding the public. "The perimeter is crawling with Reapers," Alina warned, her eyes darting across the radar. "Those are the Iron Hand's elite ground units. Heavy armor, thermal vision, and they don't miss." "Then we don't give them a chance to aim," I said. The Vulture screamed over the rooftops, skimming the buildings so low that the heat from our engines shattered windows. The Needle was surrounded by a massive concrete courtyard. Hundreds of Reapers stood behind sandbags, their pulse rifles pointed at the sky. "Jax, give them a reason to look down," I yelled. Jax kicked open the side door. He didn't use his machine gun this time. He grabbed the Rainmaker, a multi-barrel rocket pod we had salvaged from a downed gunship. "With pleasure," Jax roared. The sky filled with small, guided micromissiles. They rained down on the courtyard, turning the Iron Hand's defensive line into a sea of orange fire. The Reapers were thrown into the air like ragdolls. The sound was like 1,000 thunderclaps happening at once. "Dropping in 3, 2, 1, Alina shouted, tilting the ship. We didn't wait for a landing. Kale and I leaped from the Vulture, our boots hitting the hot concrete of the tower's base while the smoke was still thick. Immediately, 2 Reapers emerged from the shadows of the entrance, their red visors glowing. Before they could level their weapons, I fired Justice twice. The bullets found the weak spots in their neck armor. They went down without a sound. "Kale, the basement. Cut the backup power and lock the elevators," I commanded. "I'm going to the transmitter floor." "See you on the other side, Chief," Kale said, fading into the smoke like a ghost. I sprinted toward the main lobby. The interior of the tower was cold, white, and clinical, a sharp contrast to the burning city outside. I reached the stairs, my lungs burning. I didn't take the elevator, it was a death trap. I climbed. By the 20th floor, my legs were heavy, but my mind was focused. On the 30th floor, I met resistance. A squad of 5 Reapers was waiting in the stairwell. They opened fire. I threw a flashbang grenade into the center of their formation. Bang! As they clutched their ears, blinded by the white light, I moved in. I didn't waste bullets. I used my knife, moving with the precision of a surgeon. 5 seconds later, I was the only one standing. I finally reached the top, the transmission hub. It was a circular room filled with humming servers and glowing screens. At the center sat the lead technician, a man in a lab coat who was shaking so hard he could barely hold his coffee cup. Don't kill me," he pleaded, holding his hands up. "I'm just an engineer." "Then do your job," I said, shoving the encrypted data drive into his hand. "Upload this. Every name, every bank account, every recorded conversation of the Iron Hand leaders. I want it on every screen in the world. Now." "The encryption. It's too strong. It will take minutes and they'll see the override from the central command." "Then you better start typing fast," I growled, pointing mercy at his head. "Because the central command is currently being blown up by my friend outside." As the technician's fingers flew across the keyboard, the monitors in the room began to flicker. I saw the progress bar, 15%, 32%. Suddenly the speakers in the room crackled. A new voice filled the air, not the general and not the masked man. It was a woman's voice, sharp, elegant, and terrifyingly calm. "Unbreakable 01, she said. "You've caused quite a mess." "Who is this?" I asked, looking around for a camera. "I am the architect, the one who funded Vance, the one who truly owns this city. You think a few names on a screen will stop us? We are the economy. We are the law." "You're a target," I replied. "Perhaps, but look at your screens, hero." The monitors shifted. Instead of the data drive, they showed the streets of District 9. I saw Jax and Alina in the Vulture, surrounded by 10 hunter drones. I saw Kale in the basement, trapped in a room that was rapidly filling with poison gas. "I will give you a choice," the architect said. "Stop the upload and I let your team live. Finish the upload and you will be the only one left to watch the world fall." The technician looked at me, his face pale. "Chief, the bar is at 80%. What do I do?" I looked at the screen. I saw Jax fighting like a lion and Alina pulling maneuvers that defied gravity. They were dying for this. We had all agreed, no matter what, the truth comes first. I felt a tear sting my eye, but my hand stayed steady. "Finish it," I whispered. "But your friends." "I said finish it," I roared. The technician hit the enter key. Upload complete. Across the world, every television, every billboard, and every phone stopped showing the Iron Hand propaganda. Instead, the faces of the world's most powerful billionaires appeared, labeled as mass murderers. The recordings of them laughing about the mediator's death began to play on a loop. The order was shattered, the mask was off. "You've won a battle," the architect's voice cold and distant, "but you've lost your family. Goodbye, Commander." The screen showing the Vulture went white as a massive explosion engulfed the ship. I fell to my knees, the silence of the room more painful than any gunshot. I had brought the war and I had left nothing standing, not even the people I loved. Or so I thought. Suddenly, my earpiece crackled with static. "Chief, cough, if you think a few drones can take me out, you really are getting old." It was Jax. His voice was weak, but he was alive. "Alina pulled us into a dive. We're down, but we're breathing." A wave of relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. "Get to the extraction point," I said, my voice shaking. "We aren't done yet. We found the architect, and now we're going to find her house." I looked at the technician. "Get out of here. The world knows the truth now. The rest is up to them." I walked to the window and looked out. The people in the streets were no longer running away. They were picking up stones. They were picking up the weapons of the fallen reapers. They were looking at the giant screens, and then they were looking at the iron-hand soldiers with a new kind of fire in their eyes. The broadcast had started a war. Now the truth was going to finish it. The city was no longer just a battlefield. It was a furnace of revolution. With the names of the elite exposed on every screen, the Iron Hand's authority didn't just crumble, it evaporated. But the war wasn't over. The architect was still out there, and she was the one holding the leash. Chief, we're grounded. Alina's voice came through the static, heavy with the sound of coughing. The Vulture is a wreck. We're in an alleyway 3 blocks from the tower. Jax is bleeding and Kale is still silent. I'm here, Kale's voice finally broke through, sounding strained. I found a gas mask in the basement locker. I'm out, but the tower is being swarmed by local militias. The people are taking it back, Chief. Regroup at the old cathedral, I ordered, moving toward the elevator shaft. I didn't wait for the car. I hooked my line and rappelled down the center of the building, descending hundreds of feet in seconds. The architect thinks she's safe in her ivory tower. We're going to prove her wrong. The gathering storm. 30 minutes later, we met in the shadows of the old cathedral. The building was a ruin from a war decades ago, its stone walls scarred by fire. Jax was sitting on a crate, wrapping a thick bandage around his thigh. Alina was cleaning a deep cut on her forehead, her laptop still open on her knees. Kale stood by the shattered stained glass window, watching the street. We look like hell, Jax said, trying to grin despite the pain. Hell is where we're going, I replied, tossing the data drive onto Alina's lap. Can you find her, the woman who called herself the architect? Alina's fingers danced across the keys. I'm tracking the signal of that architect transmission. It didn't come from a skyscraper, it's coming from the sea. About 10 miles off the coast, there's a private artificial island called the Aegis. It's a floating fortress. A floating fortress, Kale muttered. How do we even get close? We don't have a ship anymore. I looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a bloody orange light over the smoke of the city. The Iron Hand has a naval shipyard at the docks. They have Wraith stealth boats. We're going to steal one. Chief, Alina said, her voice turning serious. The Aegis isn't just a house. It's the backup server for the entire global financial system. If we go there and start a fight, we aren't just taking down a person. We're pulling the plug on the world's economy. The world's economy is built on the blood of the people she killed, I said, checking the chambers of justice and mercy. Let it fall. We'll build something better in the ashes. The docks. The shipyard was a nightmare of steel and searchlights. With the city in revolt, the Iron Hand had pulled back most of its forces to protect the docks. They knew the Aegis was their last stand. We need a distraction, I whispered. I've got it, Jax said, hauling a crate of high-velocity grenades he had borrowed from the tower. I'll set these off at the fuel depot on the north side. When the tanks go up, every guard in this yard is going to run toward the fire. Kale, you and Alina get to the terminal and prep the Wraith boat. I'll provide cover from the crane, I instructed. Jax moved into the shadows. 5 minutes later, the night turned into day. Boom! The fuel depot erupted in a massive mushroom cloud of fire. The sirens screamed, and the Iron Hand soldiers scrambled, exactly as planned. Go, I barked. I climbed the massive shipping crane, my rifle slung over my shoulder. From the bird's-eye view, I watched Alina and Kale sprint across the wet asphalt toward the sleek, black stealth boat. A squad of reapers emerged from a warehouse, spotting them. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The suppressed rounds dropped the lead soldiers before they could even raise their rifles. Kale threw a smoke puck, masking their movement as they jumped onto the deck of the Wraith. We're in, Alina's voice rang in my ear. Engines are hot, Chief, get down here. I didn't take the ladder. I grabbed a cargo cable and slid down, landing on the moving deck of the boat just as it roared to life. The Wraith sat low in the water, its jagged, radar-absorbent hull cutting through the waves like a shark. The Aegis. The 10-mile trip was a blur of salt spray and cold wind. As we approached, the Aegis loomed out of the mist. It was a marvel of engineering, a massive hexagonal platform held up by giant pillars, glowing with a soft blue light. Radar is picking up automated torpedo launchers, Alina warned. I'm jamming their sensors, but it won't last long. We have to dock in the maintenance bay underneath the platform. The boat slid under the massive structure. Above us, we could hear the hum of heavy machinery. We were inside the belly of the beast. We climbed a series of service ladders, emerging into a corridor that looked like it belonged in a spacecraft. The walls were pure white, and the air was filtered and cold. "This is it," I said, looking at the map on my HUD. "The architect's private quarters are at the very top. The server farm is at the center." Suddenly, the lights in the hallway turned red. A familiar, calm voice filled the room. "You are persistent, Commander. I'll give you that," the architect said. "But you've made a mistake. You brought a war to a place that only knows logic. Do you know what happens to a glitch in the system?" The floor beneath us opened up. "Jump!" I yelled. We dived forward as the tiles slid away, revealing a pit of electrified coils. We caught the edge of the far side, our boots dangling over the blue sparks. "She's not playing anymore," Jax gasped, pulling himself up. "Good," I said, my eyes cold. "Neither are we." We moved forward into the heart of the floating fortress. We had crossed the ocean to find the woman who killed Peace. Now, we were going to make sure she never spoke again. The Aegis was not just a fortress. It was a labyrinth of high-tech death. Every step we took was tracked by invisible sensors, and the very walls seemed to breathe with a mechanical hum. We were deep in the logic core now, the place where the world's wealth was managed by algorithms and cold, hard data. "Chief, the security here is unlike anything I've ever seen," Alina whispered, her fingers flying across her portable terminal. "I'm fighting an AI that is trying to lock every door and vent in this sector. If I lose this digital tug-of-war, we're buried alive." "Keep fighting, Alina," I said, signaling the team to move in a diamond formation. "Jax, you're our shield. Kale, watch the shadows. We're close." The Hall of Glass. We entered a massive chamber. The floor was polished black obsidian, and the walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass. Beyond the glass, we could see the churning gray waters of the ocean. In the center of the room stood a circular desk, and sitting behind it was a woman. She didn't look like a warlord, she looked like a CEO. She was middle-aged, elegant, wearing a sharp gray suit with her hair tied in a perfect bun. This was the architect. "Welcome to the center of the world," she said, her voice echoing without a microphone. She didn't look up from her screen. "I've been calculating your arrival. There was a 94% probability you would make it this far. The 6% was Jax dying at the fuel depot. You're lucky, Jax." Jax leveled his machine gun at her. "Luck didn't have anything to do with it, lady. It was spite." "Spite is a powerful motivator, but it's messy," the architect said, finally looking up. Her eyes were as cold as the deep sea. "You've leaked the names. You've burned the cities. You think you've brought war. But all you've done is created a vacuum. Without us to manage the chaos, the world will tear itself apart in 3 days." "We'll take those odds," I said, stepping forward. "Step away from the console. We're shutting the Aegis down." She smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Shut it down. Commander, the Aegis is the world. If you kill the servers, you wipe out every pension, every medical record, and every food shipment tracking system on the planet. Millions will starve. Is that the justice you want?" I hesitated. This was the trap. She wasn't holding us hostage. She was holding the world's survival hostage. "She's lying," Kale hissed. "She's trying to buy time." "I don't lie," the architect replied. I calculate, and right now the calculation says you cannot kill me without killing the people you claim to protect. The executioners. Suddenly, the glass walls behind her began to slide upward. From the darkness behind the glass, 4 figures stepped out. My heart went cold. They weren't robots. They were men and women wearing the old Unbreakables uniform, the same one I was wearing. But their eyes were vacant, their skin pale and laced with glowing blue veins. "Meet the Sentinels," the architect said. "The members of your old unit who were killed in the Blackwood operation 5 years ago. I didn't let them die. I improved them. They are faster, stronger, and they feel no pain. They are the perfect logic. You turned them into puppets." Jax's voice was shaking with pure rage. One of the Sentinels was Sarah, his former squad leader. "I gave them a purpose that never ends," the architect said. "Sentinels, delete the intruders." The fight was a blur of steel and betrayal. The Sentinels moved with a speed that defied human biology. One of them slammed into Jax, throwing him across the room like he weighed nothing. Another engaged Kale, moving through the shadows even better than he could. I was left with the leader, a man who used to be my best friend, Marcus. He lunged at me with a high-frequency blade. I parried with justice, the metal sparks flying. "Marcus, it's me, stop," I yelled. He didn't speak. He just swung again, cutting a shallow line across my chest. There was no soul left in those eyes, only code. "Elena, the servers," I shouted as I ducked under a lethal strike. "Find a way to shut her down without killing the system. There has to be a back door." "I'm trying, but the architect is blocking me from the main terminal," Elena screamed, ducking behind the desk as bullets flew over her head. I realized then that we couldn't win this fight with guns. We were fighting our own ghosts. I looked at the architect, who was calmly watching the slaughter. She was the brain. The Sentinels were just the hands. I took a hit to the shoulder, the pain flaring like fire. I dropped one of my guns and grabbed a thermal charge from my belt. "Jax, Kale, get to the center," I roared. They understood. We fought our way back toward each other, forming a tight circle in the middle of the room. The 4 Sentinels surrounded us, their blades glowing with blue energy. "This is the end of the line, Commander," the architect said. "Logic always wins." "You forgot one thing about the Unbreakables," I said, blood dripping from my lip. "And what is that?" "We were never built on logic. We were built on sacrifice." I didn't throw the charge at the Sentinels. I threw it at the floor, at the logic core beneath us. "No," the architect screamed, her calm finally breaking. The explosion ripped through the obsidian floor. We didn't fall into electricity. We fell into the cooling vats of the main servers. The impact was freezing, the blue liquid slowing our fall. The room above us erupted in flames. The connection to the Sentinels' brain chips was severed instantly. Above us, I saw the glowing blue veins in Marcus's neck go dark. He collapsed, finally at peace. We were in the basement of the world now. The water was rising. The architect was still above, but her power was bleeding out. "Elena," I said, coughing up blue coolant, "can you reach the core from here?" "Yes," she whispered, her hands shaking as she plugged her cable into a raw data port. "I can't save the old system, but I can rewrite it. I can give the keys back to the people." "Do it," I said, "and leave nothing of her standing." The Aegis was tilted at a dangerous 20-degree angle. The explosion in the logic core had triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Alarms blared, not the calm, artificial voice of the architect, but the raw, screaming sirens of a sinking vessel. Blue coolant fluid mixed with seawater, swirling around our waists as we struggled to stand. "I've got it!" Elena's voice was a triumphant scream over the roar of the rushing water. "I've bypassed her encryption. I'm not just shutting her out, I'm decentralized. I'm sending the control codes for the global infrastructure to thousands of independent servers across the world. No one person will ever own the world again." "Transfer complete," she yelled, hitting the final key. High above us, we heard a frantic, rhythmic pounding. The architect wasn't a goddess anymore. She was a trapped woman in a sinking box. "We have to go, Chief," Jax shouted, bracing himself against a vibrating support beam. "This whole platform is going to buckle in minutes." The final ascent. We fought our way back up the service stairs. The elegant, white hallways were now twisted metal graveyards. The glass walls of the main chamber had shattered, and the cold Atlantic Ocean was pouring in, bringing the fury of the storm inside. We reached the top floor. The architect was no longer at her desk. She was at the emergency escape pod, frantically typing codes into a keypad. Her perfect bun had come undone, and her gray suit was soaked and torn. "It's locked," I said, my voice echoing through the wind and spray. She spun around, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "What did you do? You've destroyed the balance. Without the Aegis, there is no order. You've handed the world to the mob." "No," I said, stepping closer, my boots crunching on broken glass. "I handed the world back to the people who live in it. You don't get to decide their fate from a floating palace anymore." The platform gave a violent lurch. A massive piece of the ceiling collapsed, pinning the escape pod under tons of steel. The architect's last hope for survival was crushed in an instant. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I have billions, I can give you anything. Power, wealth, a seat at the table." I looked at justice and mercy in my hands. Then I did something I hadn't done since the war began. I holstered them. "You brought war to the world," I said, "and you left nothing standing. Now you're going to stay here with the nothing you created." "Chief, the Wraith boat is drifting away," Kale shouted from the balcony. "We have to jump now." We turned our backs on her. Her screams were drowned out by the sound of the ocean claiming the Aegis. We ran for the edge of the shattered balcony. "On three," I yelled. We leaped into the abyss. The fall felt like an eternity. The freezing water hit me like a concrete wall, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, there was only darkness and the crushing weight of the sea. I struggled toward the surface, my heavy gear dragging me down. I broke the surface, gasping for air. The Aegis was a mountain of fire in the middle of the ocean. Slowly, the hexagonal platform began to slide beneath the waves. A massive whirlpool formed, sucking the debris and the architect into the deep. "Over here." I saw the black hull of the Wraith boat. Jax was already on board, reaching out a hand. He pulled me up, followed by Elena and Kale. We collapsed on the deck, four broken shadows watching the last of the Iron Hand's empire disappear into the Atlantic. The silence that followed was heavy. There was no cheering. There was no music, just the sound of the engine and the waves. "Is it over?" Elena asked, her head resting on her knees. I looked at the horizon. The smoke from the city was still visible in the distance, but the giant broadcast screens we had seen earlier were different now. They weren't showing the architect's face, and they weren't showing our data leak. They were showing people. People in the streets helping each other. People putting out fires. People standing in the ruins of the Ivory City, not as sheep, but as survivors. "The war is over," I said, wiping the salt from my eyes. "But the world is broken, and we're the ones who broke it." "We did what we had to do," Jax grunted, clutching his wounded leg. "Maybe," I said, "but we aren't heroes, Jax. We're just the ones who survived the broadcast." "Where to now, Chief?" Kale asked, looking at the compass. I looked at my team. We were the Unbreakables. We had killed the general, we had exposed the elite, and we had drowned the architect. We had brought the war, and we had left nothing standing. "We go home," I said, "whatever is left of it." As the Wraith boat headed toward the shore, the sun finally rose, clear and bright, over a world that was finally, terrifyingly free. The engine of the Wraith boat hummed a low, tired tune as we approached the city docks. The skyline, once a glittering crown of corporate power, was now a jagged silhouette of smoke and skeletal steel. The day of infinite peace had happened only 48 hours ago, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. We docked in silence. There were no soldiers to greet us, no police to arrest us. The Iron Hand had vanished, their funding gone and their leaders exposed. The world was in a state of shock, a quiet so deep it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. The aftermath. We walked through the streets of District 9. It was different now. The fear that had hung over the city for years was replaced by a strange, raw energy. People were out in the open. They were cleaning the rubble, sharing food, and talking, really talking, without looking over their shoulders at the cameras. The cameras were dead. Alina had seen to that. "I'm leaving," Kale said abruptly as we reached the ruins of the old cafe where this had all started. He looked at the horizon, his eyes distant. "I spent my whole life hiding in the shadows of other people's wars. I want to see what a sunrise looks like when I'm not holding a rifle." He didn't wait for a handshake. He just nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement between two ghosts, and disappeared into the crowd. Kale was finally free to be a ghost by choice, not by necessity. Jack sat down on the remains of a stone bench. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, and stained with the grease of a dozen different weapons. "I think I'll stay here," Jax grunted, lighting a crumpled cigarette he'd found in his pocket. "This district needs someone who knows how to build things as well as he knows how to break them. There's a lot of rebuilding to do, Chief, and I'm tired of running." He looked at the children playing in the street with a piece of salvaged metal. For the first time, I saw a genuine smile on his face. The heavy gunner had found his peace in the wreckage. The new architecture. Alina stood beside me, her tablet glowing with the faint data streams of the new, decentralized world. "The system is holding," she whispered. "The power grids are back online, but they're being managed by local councils now. No more architects. No more kings. It's messy, Chief. People are arguing, they're fighting over resources. It's chaotic." "It's human," I replied. "It's better than the order Vance wanted." "I have to go to the Ivory City," she said, looking at me. "They need someone to help stabilize the global archives. I can make sure the history of what happened isn't rewritten by the next person who wants to be a god." She leaned in and hugged me, a brief, tight grip that spoke of all the times we had almost died together. "Don't be a stranger, Chief. Even if there's no more war, you're still an unbreakable." Then she was gone, heading toward the heart of the reconstruction. The last unbreakable. I was alone. I walked back to the hidden hangar under the bridge. The Vulture was gone, the equipment was gathered, and the false walls were torn down. I reached into my coat and pulled out Justice and Mercy. The black steel felt heavy, too heavy. I walked to the edge of the river, the water murky and deep. I looked at the engravings on the barrels one last time. We had brought war to end a lie. We had left nothing standing so that something new could grow. I tossed the guns into the water. Splash, splash. They vanished without a trace, joining the ghosts of the general, the architect, and the mediator in the silt of history. I wasn't a commander anymore. I wasn't a soldier. I was just a man in a dusty coat. I turned away from the river and started walking. I didn't have a map and I didn't have a mission. For the first time in my life, the broadcast was silent. As I walked into the city, a young girl ran past me, laughing, chasing a colorful kite made of old propaganda posters. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know about the Aegis, or the Sentinels, or the blood spilled on the Ivory City stage. She only knew that the sky was clear, and the day was hers. And that was enough.